Well, hello and welcome back. We are back with The Secret Garden, which I must say, judging just on one chapter at all so far, I'm already liking better than at least half of the public domain books that we've read so far. I don't know if the difference is that this is a children's book or that it's an British American author, or I don't know what the difference is, but we've had more character building in one chapter than we got in, I think, all of Around the World in 80 Days, so I'm here for it. Not that the character we've met has been pleasant, and she's just gone through what I would think was an incredibly uh, traumatic experience, having everyone around her die of cholera. Not the way you want to start your life, but it doesn't seem to have affected her very much, mostly because it sounds like her parents were terrible. We're just going to go with terrible. A mother who didn't want her, a father who is never around. Poor Mary is not being set up for the best and brightest of all childhoods, but you know what? You can always grow. So I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. But I guess we're going to find out, aren't we? We're jumping into chapter 2 of The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And chapter 2 is titled Mistress Mary, Quite Contrary. That's a good chapter title. Mary had quite liked to look at her mother from a distance, and she had thought her very pretty, but as she knew very little of her, she could scarcely have been expected to love her or to miss her very much when she was gone. She did not miss her at all. In fact, and as she was a self-absorbed child, she gave her entire thought to herself, as she had always done. If she had been older, she would no doubt have been very anxious at being left alone in the world, but she was very young, and as she had always been taken care of, she supposed she always would be. What she thought was that she would like to know if she was going to nice people, who would be polite to her and give her her own way, as her ayah and the other servants had always done. She knew that she was not going to stay at the English clergyman's house where she was taken at first. She didn't want to stay. The English clergyman was poor, and he had 5 children, nearly all the same age, and they wore shabby clothes and were always quarreling and snatching toys from each other. Mary hated their untidy bungalow and was so disagreeable to them that after the first day or two, no one would play with her. By the second day, they had given her a nickname which made her furious. It was Basil who thought of it first. Basil was a little boy with impudent blue eyes and a turned-up nose, and Mary hated him. She was playing by herself under a tree, just as she had been playing the day the cholera broke out. She was making heaps of earth and paths for a garden, and Basil came and stood near to watch her. Soon he got rather interested and suddenly made a suggestion. "Why don't you put a heap of stones there and pretend it's a rockery?" he said. "They're in the middle." He leaned over to point. "Go away," said Mary. "I don't want boys. Go away." For a moment, Basil looked angry, and then he began to tease. He was always teasing his sisters. He danced around and around her and made faces and sang and laughed. "Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and marigolds all in a row." He sang it until the other children heard it and laughed. And the crosser that Mary got, the more they sang, "Mistress Mary, quite contrary," and after that, as long as she stayed with them, they called her Mistress Mary, quite contrary. And when they spoke of her to each other, and often when they spoke to her as well. You're going to be sent home, said Basil, at the end of the week, and we're all happy. I'm happy too, said Mary. Where is home? She doesn't know where her home is, said Basil with a 7-year-old scorn. It's England, of course. Our grandmama lives there, and our sister Mabel was sent to her last year, but you're not going to your grandmama because you don't have one. You're going to your uncle. His name is Mr. Archibald Craven. Well, I don't know anything about him, snapped Mary. I know you don't, said Basil. You don't know anything. Girls never do. I heard father and mother talking about him. He lives in a great big desolate old house in the country and nobody goes near him. He's too cranky and he won't let them, and they won't come if he won't let them. I also heard he's a hunchback and he's horrible. I don't believe you, said Mary. And she turned her back and stuck her fingers in her ears because she just wasn't going to listen anymore. But she thought about it a lot afterwards. And when Mrs. Crawford told her that night that she was going to sail away to England in a few days and go to her uncle, Mr. Archibald Craven, who lived in Misselthwaite Manor, she looked so stony and stubbornly uninterested that they didn't know what to think. They tried to be kind to her, but she only turned her face away when Mrs. Crawford attempted to give her a kiss. She held herself stiffly when Mr. Crawford would pat her on the shoulder. She is such a plain child, said Mrs. Crawford pityingly. And your mother was such a pretty creature, with a very pretty manner, too. And Mary has the most unattractive ways I've ever seen in a child. The children call her Mistress Mary, quite contrary, and though it's naughty of them, you can kind of understand it. Perhaps if her mother had carried her pretty face and her pretty manners oftener into the nursery, Mary would have learned some pretty ways too. It's sad, now the beautiful thing is gone, to remember that many people never even knew that she had a child at all. I don't think she even looked at the child, said Mrs. Crawford. When her Anya was dead, there was no one to give even a thought to the little thing. Think of the servants all running away and leaving her alone in that deserted bungalow. Colonel McGrew said he almost jumped out of his skin when he opened the door and found her standing there by herself in the middle of the room. Mary made the long voyage to England under the care of an officer's wife who was taking her children to leave them in a boarding school. This woman was very much absorbed in her own little boy and girl and was rather glad to hand the child over to the woman Mr. Archibald Craven sent to meet them in London. This woman was his housekeeper at Misselthwaite Manor, and her name was Mrs. Medlock. She was a stout woman with red cheeks and sharp black eyes. She wore a very purple dress, a black silk mantle with jet fringe on it, and a black bonnet with purple velvet flowers, which stuck up and trembled when she moved her head. Mary didn't like her at all. But as she very seldom liked any people, there was nothing remarkable about that. Besides which, it was very evident that Mrs. Medlock also didn't think much of Mary. My word, she's a plain little piece of goods, she said. And we had heard that her mother was a beauty. She didn't hand much of that down now, has she, ma'am? Maybe she'll improve when she gets older, said the officer's wife. If she were not so sallow and had a better expression, her features are quite good. Children, they can change so much. She'll have to alter a good deal, said Mrs. Medlock. And there's nothing likely to improve children at Misselthwaite, if you ask me. They thought that Mary wasn't listening, because she was standing a little apart from them at the window of the private hotel they had gone to. She was watching the passing buses and cabs and people, but she heard quite well. And she was made curious about her uncle and the place that he lived. What sort of a place was it? And what would he be like? What was a hunchback? She had never seen one. Maybe there were no hunchbacks in India. Since she had been living in other people's houses and had had no ayah, she had begun to feel lonely and to think queer thoughts which were new to her. She had begun to wonder why she had never seemed to belong to anyone, even when her father and mother had been alive. Other children seemed to belong to their fathers and mothers, but she had never seemed to really be anybody's little girl. She had had servants and food and clothes, but no one had ever taken any notice of her. She didn't know that this was because she was a disagreeable child, but then, of course, she didn't know that she was disagreeable. She often thought that other people were, but she didn't know that she was herself. She thought Mrs. Medlock was the most disagreeable person she had ever seen, with her common, highly colored face and her common bonnet. When the next day they set out on their journey to Yorkshire, she walked through the station to the railway carriage with her head up and trying to keep as far from her as she could because she didn't want to be seen belonging to her. It would have made her angry to think that people imagined that she was that woman's little girl. But Mrs. Medlock was not in the least disturbed by Mary and her thoughts. She was the kind of woman who would stand no nonsense from the youngsters. At least that is what she would have said had she been asked. She had not wanted to go to London just when her sister Maria's daughter was about to be married, but she had a comfortable, well-placed job as the housekeeper at Miss Misselthwaite Manor, and the only way which she could keep that job was to do immediately what Mr. Archibald Craven told her. She never even dared to ask a question. Captain Lennox and his wife died of the cholera, Mr. Craven had said in his cold way. Captain Lennox was my wife's brother, and I am their daughter's guardian. The child is to be brought here. You must go to London and bring her. So she had packed a small trunk and made the journey. Mary sat in her corner of the railway carriage and looked plain and fretful. She had nothing to read, nothing to look at, and she folded her thin little black gloved hands in her lap. Her black dress made her look more yellow than ever, and her limp blonde hair straggled from under her black crape hat. A more marred-looking youngster I've never seen in my life, thought Mrs. Medlock. Marred is a Yorkshire word that means spoiled and pettish. She had never seen a child who sat so still without doing anything. And at last she got tired of watching her and began to talk in a brisk, hard voice. I suppose I may as well tell you something about where you're going, she said. Do you know anything about your uncle? No, said Mary. Never heard your father and mother talk about him? No, said Mary. Mary frowned because she remembered that her father and mother had never talked to her about anything in particular. Certainly they had never told her things. Humph, said Mrs. Medlock, staring at her strange, unresponsive little face. She didn't say any more for a few minutes, and then she began speaking again. I suppose you might as well be told something to prepare you. You're going to a queer place. Mary said nothing, and Mrs. Medlock looked rather discomforted by her apparent indifference, but after a deep breath she went on. Not but that it's a grand big place in a gloomy way, and Mr. Craven is proud of it in his way, and that's gloomy enough too. The house is 600 years old, and it's on the edge of the moor, and there's near 100 rooms to it, though most of them shut up and locked. And there's pictures and fine old furniture and things that have been there for ages, and there's a big park around it, and gardens and trees with branches that trail to the ground. Some of them. She paused and took a deep breath. But there's nothing else, she said suddenly. Mary had begun to listen in spite of herself. It all sounded so unlike India, and anything new rather attracted her. But she did not intend to look as if she were interested. That was one of her happy, disagreeable ways, so she just sat there. "Well," said Mrs. Medlock, "what do you think?" "Nothing," said Mary. "I know nothing about such places." That made Mrs. Medlock laugh. She said, "You're like an old woman. Don't you care?" "Doesn't matter," said Mary, "if I care or not." "You're right enough there," said Mrs. Medlock. "It doesn't. What you're to be kept at Misselthwaite Manor for, I don't know, unless because it's the easiest way. He's not going to trouble himself about you, that's sure and certain. He troubles himself about nobody." She then stopped as if she had just remembered something in the nick of time. "He's got a crooked back," she said. "That set him wrong. He was a sour young man and got no good of all of his money and that entire big place till he was married." Mary's eyes turned towards her, in spite of her intention to not care. She had never thought of a hunchback's being married, and she was a bit surprised. Mrs. Medlock saw this, and since she was a talkative woman, she continued with a bit more interest. This was a way to pass the time, at any rate. "She was a sweet, pretty thing, and he would have walked the entire world over to get her a blade of grass if she wanted it. Nobody thought that she'd marry him, but she did, and people said she married him for his money, but she didn't. She really didn't. When she died—" Mary gave a little involuntary jump. "Oh, did she die?" she said, without even meaning to. She had just remembered a French fairy story that she had once read called Riquet à la Houppette. It had been about a poor hunchback and a beautiful princess, and it made her suddenly sorry for Mr. Archibald Craven. "Yes, she died," said Mrs. Medlock. "And it made him more queer than ever. He cares about nobody. He won't see anyone. Most of the time he goes away, and when he is at Misselthwaite, he shuts himself in the West Wing and won't let anybody but Pitcher see him. Pitcher's an old man, but he took care of him when he was a child, and he knows the mister's ways." This sounded like something in a book, and it didn't make Mary feel cheerful. A house with 100 rooms, nearly all shut with their doors locked. A house on the edge of a moor, whatever a moor was, sounded dreary. And a man with a crooked back who shut himself away. Mary stared out the window with her lips pinched together, and it seemed quite natural that the rain should begin to pour down on the gray slanting road and splash and stream down the window panes. If the pretty wife had been alive, she might have made things cheerful by being something like her own mother had been, and by running in and out and going to parties as her mother had done, in frocks full of lace. But Mary's mother wasn't there anymore, and neither was this wife. "You don't need to expect to see him, because 10 to 1 you never will," said Mrs. Medlock. "And you mustn't expect that there'll be people there to talk to you. You're going to have to play and look after yourself. You'll be told what rooms you can go into and what rooms you're to keep out of. There's plenty of gardens, but when you're in the house, don't go wandering and poking. Mr. Craven won't like that." "I wouldn't even want to go poking," said the sour little Mary. And just as suddenly as she had begun to be rather sorry for Mr. Archibald Craven, she began to stop being sorry, and to think that he was unpleasant enough to deserve everything bad that had ever happened to him. And so she turned her face towards the streaming panes of the window of the railway carriage and gazed out at the gray rainstorm, which looked as if it would go on forever and ever. She watched it so long and steadily that the grayness grew heavier and heavier before her very eyes until she fell asleep. And that is the end of the chapter. The mystery deepens. Okay. I definitely like this story. I am more interested and invested in this story and finding out what happened with Mr. Archibald Craven. Can you imagine coming to a house that's like all dilapidated and 600 years old and has 100 rooms and that just sounds like a adventure and a half. So that's what I hope that we're in for. I am totally invested in this, and I hope that you are too. I also see that the sun has come out. It was gray and snowing this morning, and my son and I went out and shoveled, and now the sun has kind of come out. That's exciting. It means at least the snow stopped, at least for now. Anyway, thank you as always for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter as much as I did, and I really did enjoy that chapter, so yay! And I will see you tomorrow.